What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Gizmo's movie theories and reviews. So today we got a wild theory for you. So this is essentially a movie theory I come up with about the true identity and origins of the aliens from the War of the Worlds stories, and all aliens in general in cinema. So we hope you enjoy, and here we go. This is my theory as to why the tripods in the 2005 movie War of the Worlds look exactly like the aliens who pilot them. And this theory is also about what I think is the true origins and identity of those aliens from War of the Worlds, as well as all aliens from cinema. So here we go. In the 2005 version of War of the Worlds, the tripods and the aliens who pilot them are pretty much identical. The tripods walk on 3 legs, and so do the aliens. The placement of the lights on the tripods are similar to where the eyes are on the alien pilots. The tripods even have the heat rays, which can be seen as 2 extra appendages, just like the 2 arms the alien pilots have. So we've determined that the tripods look just like the alien pilots. But why? Well, here's the theory as to why it is. Could it be symbolic, pertaining to the tripods and alien pilots literally walking over humanity on Earth just like a human being would tower over ants and squish them with no remorse, since humans see ants as an inferior species, a lower life form? So perhaps the aliens in the War of the Worlds stories see humans as an inferior species, like how humans see an ant. And so the aliens built the tripods and designed them to look just like the alien pilots as a symbolic gesture of literally towering over and stepping on or smashing a lower life form, just like humans do to ants. The aliens literally use their machines, their tripods, as a symbolic gesture to, like a human would do to an ant, annihilate the inferior species. But the question is, why do the aliens in the War of the Worlds hate humans? Well, think about this. In the movie Prometheus, the movie lore says that the engineers create humanity as a slave race, and when humanity no longer serves a purpose to the engineers, their creators, the engineers will return to Earth and wipe out the inferior human species. But think about this. The aliens in the War of the Worlds story, while the aliens have taken many forms over the years, they are ultimately never humans. And in human religion, let's say the Holy Bible for example, there is a whole hierarchy of heavenly angels, each with a different task to do. Biblically accurate angels, for example, are often described as being non-human and terrifying. We've all heard the story of Ezekiel's wheel, and the creatures often described as angels in their strange non-human form. So my point is maybe what we call aliens from another planet are actually angels. Now, you might say, but they ride in spaceships, and religious angels teleport. Well, dear skeptic, ever heard of the book Technology of the Gods by David Hatcher? It summarizes that what we call gods could actually have created technology that helped them rule the universe and keep mankind and any other life forms they rule in bondage. So, also, if we look at the theory of immortality first proposed by Hugh Everett III back in 1957, which says that the longer an immortal being stays in the mortal universe, the less mortal it becomes. Therefore, any superpowers or godlike abilities would be less effective or non-existent the longer the immortal beings stay in the mortal universe. So, according to the theory of immortality, if an immortal being's godlike powers such as teleportation, telekinesis, mind control, etc. become less effective for spending a large amount of time in the mortal universe, then the immortal beings would therefore need to create technology to make up for their inability to use their godlike powers, either at all or to the extent they could in heaven. So if the immortal beings can't teleport, then how would they traverse across the universe? Well, in spaceships for example. If the immortal beings can't defend themselves using telekinesis, then they would need weapons like guns, ammo, and other weaponry, for example. So with this in mind, whatever powers the immortal beings had in heaven, they no longer possess in the mortal universe due to their powers becoming less potent or non-existent from spending X amount of time in the mortal universe. So the immortal beings would have to create and use technology to make up for their lack of superpowers. And being superior to mortals, these immortal beings would create what ancient humans would call futuristic technology. Therefore, as David Hatcher puts it, the technology of the gods, so now that we got why immortal beings would need technology like spaceships and weaponry out of the way, we need to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the angels' existence? Well, dear wanderer, the purpose of the angels is to serve God. And if you look at 90% of any and all alien movies made inside and outside Hollywood, the aliens come to Earth to annihilate humanity. with the exceptions being E.T., District 9, and a few other movies, books, shows, and video games. So, if immortal beings that spend too much time in the multi-universe need technology to make up for their inability to use their godlike powers and their purpose to serve God, God has determined, in books like the biblical book of Revelation, as well as the story of Noah in the book of Genesis, where God has determined that mankind has, multiple times, become too corrupt and sinful and must be destroyed, and in mostly all alien movies, shows, books, and video games ever created, aliens come to Earth to annihilate humans, and these angels use technology like spaceships and advanced weaponry to make up for their unusable powers, and the angels serve God, then we can conclude that what we call extraterrestrials from other planets are nothing more than angels who spend too much time in this multi-universe, so their superpowers don't work anymore, so they build technology, and their sole purpose in the multi-universe is to carry out God's will on humanity and all our life in the mortal universe, particularly pertaining to carrying out God's wrath and judgment on humanity. Then we can determine that the aliens from the world of worlds are nothing more than angels that have lost their powers and use technology that come to Earth to annihilate humanity as a mission of carrying out God's will and judgment on humanity on Earth for our sins against God. And the reason that the tripods in the 2000 War of the Worlds movie look like they're alien pilots is because the angels, whatever we call extraterrestrials, deem humanity as inferior to their angelic status and God. And like how a human steps on and kills an inferior creature like an insect, these aliens in their tripods literally step on humanity, which the angels deem as inferior to God and their angelic status and brethren due to humanity's sinful nature and corruption by sin. Wow, what a mouthful. So, I guess that solves the question of who are the aliens from the War of the Worlds stories and aliens in general in cinema. Right? Wrong! Because I got another theory for you to think about. So, here we go. The second theory as to what I think could be another possibility of the true origins identity of the aliens from the War of the Worlds stories and aliens in general in cinema stems from an idea tinkered by shows like The X-Files, Halo, and a bunch of other shows, movies, books, and video games that stems from different human religions. So, the theory is this. Here we go. Anyone remember the movie The X-Files, Fight the Future, when the well-manicured man tells Mulder the truth of extraterrestrials on Earth when he says,
"The virus is extraterrestrial. We know very little about it except that it was the original inhabitant of this planet."
This statement also reflects the story Lilith from certain Christian offshoots and sects, which states that Lilith was the original wife of Adam, but she would not submit to Adam and God's will, so God banished her from the Garden of Eden and created Adam a new wife known as Eve, who was more submissive to Adam and God's will. Or even in the Halo games lore, after 343 Industries took over, that says that ancient humans were at war with the Forerunners. And even in the actual evolutionary theory that a lot of scientists and archaeologists adhere to, where it says that Homo erectus, which are what evolved as modern humans, were at war with another humanoid species known as the Neanderthals in a war that lasted many millennia, till, according to certain archaeologists, the Neanderthals disappeared, perhaps defeated, and Homo erectus evolved into modern humans. Perhaps, because they emerged victorious in the Homo erectus Neanderthal war. Meanwhile, other scientists and archaeologists adhere to the theory that Homo erectus and Neanderthals lived in harmony, but these scientists, however, are unable to determine what exactly happened to the Neanderthal species and why they disappeared. A war between the two species, where Neanderthals were defeated by Homo erectus, will explain their mysterious disappearance from history. So, my point is, in all this rambling, is that what if there was another human race that existed during the time of humans in the Garden of Eden or Homo erectus, depending on what you believe? But how could that be? There is no religious evidence that another human race or species existed during the time of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Well, they're skeptic. Such an additional human species, next to the ancestors of modern humans, who you call Adam and Eve, did exist. They were called the Neanderthals, and existed alongside ancient humans, what evolution calls Homo erectus, and the Bible, for example, calls Adam and Eve. But where is the evidence in the Bible of those certain religions to back up the theory of an additional human race during the time of Adam and Eve? Well, they're skeptic. Just looking at Genesis 4:15, where it says, "If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And so the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any of those who found him should attack him." But just who are these people that Cain is afraid of? Now, some Bible scholars say Cain is afraid of his own family taking revenge on him for killing his brother. However, in Genesis 4:16 it says, "And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden." So, if Cain went east to the land of Nod, who was Cain afraid would find and kill him? Well, going back to the X-Files, when the well-manicured man told Mulder,
"The virus is extraterrestrial. We know very little about it except that it was the original inhabitant of this planet."
This scene says that there was once an ancient species on Earth, but not living alongside ancient humans like Neanderthals and Homo erectus, but many millennia before humanity ever existed on Earth. So, with this idea in mind, what if the story of Lilith is perhaps not to be taken literally, but a metaphor, a symbolism, for an ancient human race that existed long before Adam and Eve? However, according to the evolutionary theory, Homo erectus first appeared 1.9 million years ago, while Neanderthals didn't exist until 200,000 years ago. So, while the Neanderthals and Homo erectus existed and perhaps warred with each other, according to the evolutionary timeline, Homo erectus came into existence first and the Neanderthals later. However, to make my point of this theory, in the X-Files, Fight the Future, and the 343 Halo Games lore, as well as the people who Cain was afraid of to the east, all say that there was perhaps another race of beings that existed during the time of Adam and Eve, ancient humans, but just who were they? Well, what if after God created the universe in the Big Bang, the Lord created building blocks alive, like in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where the United Federation of Planets created a device called the Genesis device that would basically teleport a planet by artificially creating the building blocks alive to spring forth and form a habitable planet. Now, apply this concept to creation by God. God creates the building blocks alive and sits back and watches as life creates itself through a process of evolution until all necessary things are created before man can be created. And then God created humankind in a paradise on a planet in the middle of the universe so that this new life form, humanity, can grow and evolve, become the caretakers of all the universe. However, this new human race had a problem with their relationship with God. They saw God came to them when the Lord needed wisdom and counsel. They also saw how God was lonely and created them to be his friends, as well as other characteristics this human race attributed to God, which caused this new human race to question God's deitism. As the human race realized, what kind of all-knowing being needs counsel or wisdom from another being? That is a sign of not being all-knowing, and why would a perfect being become lonely? Loneliness is a characteristic attributed to the weak-minded. An all-powerful being would not suffer from an ailment of a lesser being. And with all these revelations, this newly created human race deemed God and his angels inferior to them, and refused to bow down and serve God and his angels, just like in the story of Lilith, where Lilith refused to bow down and serve God's will for her, because she saw herself as better and more superior to God's will. So perhaps there was a war between these newly created humans and God, or perhaps there was not. But ultimately, Lord God banished this newly created human race from the Garden of Eden and forced them to live in a faraway land where Cain was exiled to, and the Lord God created again. And so this time he created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden as his second creations after banishing his original creations for not bowing down to him. These second creations, Adam and Eve, were more submissive to God and his will. And so God saw favoritism towards them until a snake, often referred to as the devil, intervened. But what if the serpent in the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis, who seduced Adam and Eve to the dark side, was not the devil at all, but the Lord God's original creations, seeking revenge on God for punishing them and banishing them from the Lord's presence? So either the Lord's original creations shape-shifted into, or created, perhaps in a lab, a serpent that they used to corrupt Adam and Eve to cause God to lose favoritism with them as a way of revenge against God. But perhaps also causing the race of Adam and Eve to lose favoritism and therefore protection of God. So, in the long run, original humans could, sometime in the future, return and wipe out the descendants of Adam and Eve, and retake the rightful place as the dominant chosen species in the universe, which is why in the War of the Worlds stories, as well as mostly all other cinema with aliens, the aliens come to Earth to annihilate humanity, because the aliens are actually the original race created by God, returning to annihilate the descendants of Adam and Eve, and then Noah, the original race created by God, portrayed by the aliens, can take the rightful place as the dominant chosen race in the universe by replacing the descendants of Adam and Eve and Noah with themselves. So that's basically my second theory that says that the aliens from the War of the Worlds stories, as well as all aliens in cinema in general, are in fact the original race created by God. So Join me for part 2